Welcome to Sinister Truths, the channel where dark history, hidden stories, and unsettling realities come to light. Before we begin, let us know in the comments which country you're watching from and what time of day it is for you. And make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a chilling story. In the year 1859, Galveston, Texas was a city of paradoxes. To the uninitiated, it appeared as a thriving port town, bustling with commerce, the scent of salt water mixing with the tang of goods shipped from the Caribbean, the Gulf, and the mainland. Ships rocked gently in the harbor, their hulls darkened with years at sea, sails neatly furled, rigging creaking as if murmuring secrets about where they had traveled. Merchants walked the docks in crisp jackets and boots polished to a mirror shine, arguing quietly over prices, cargo, and contracts. Yet beneath this veneer of trade and civility lay a darker, unspoken truth, a trade far more sinister, one that had transformed the harbor into a marketplace of human lives. Slavery was legal, institutionalized, and profitable in Texas by 1859. Galveston, strategically positioned on the Gulf of Mexico, was one of the busiest slave trading ports in the region. Ships arrived from the Upper South, carrying human cargo from plantations in Louisiana, Mississippi, and beyond. Others docked with local slaves, brought by small boat or wagon across Texas rivers and prairies. Men, women, and children were cataloged, inspected, and appraised as if they were goods. Some for their physical strength, some for skill, some for education, and some simply for obedience. The very air on the docks seemed heavy with the tension of anticipation, a mixture of hope, fear, and silent suffering. Merchants and traders operated with practiced precision. Slaves were offloaded from ships in groups, their feet sinking into the mud of the wharves as overseers shouted instructions. Some were chained, others were led by ropes or collars. Their clothing was ragged, torn, or thin, depending on the wealth of their previous owners. The cries of children, some frightened, some screaming in protest, echoed across the docks, bouncing off wooden warehouses and hulls. Men and women whose years had etched lines of hardship and endurance into their faces walked in resigned silence. The market was not a place for rebellion, it was a place of compliance or survival. Yet even amid this grim predictability, certain individuals stood out. Traders could spot them from a distance, not by strength, not by height, not even by beauty, but by the subtle spark of awareness in their eyes. Some had an intelligence that could not be hidden, a composure that resisted the natural terror of the auction block. These individuals were rare. They were considered dangerous because they challenged the very assumptions that slavery relied upon, that fear and obedience could be guaranteed through force alone. The port of Galveston was, in many ways, a theater of human calculation. Buyers moved like predators sizing up prey, calculating muscle, posture, and tone of voice. They inspected teeth, muscles, and hands. They asked questions. Can he read? Does she sew? Does he know the Bible? Answers were expected, not volunteered. Those who answered incorrectly, or too clever, could affect the value of a person dramatically. Slaves who displayed uncommon intelligence were often priced higher, yet with that higher price came heightened suspicion. Intelligence was both a commodity and a threat. It was in this tense, calculating environment that the story of the most intelligent male slave ever traded in Galveston begins. He was not immediately famous. He did not enter the harbor with fanfare or rumor. He arrived quietly, like any other human cargo, yet there was something about him that refused to be ignored. Traders and buyers whispered among themselves, exchanging questions and doubts. It was not his size that caught their attention. He was of average build, not his appearance, not his accent, though it was precise and strangely educated for someone from the plantations. No, it was the way he carried himself, the way he observed the docks, the traders, the very people who had enslaved him. His eyes missed nothing. They seemed to read patterns in the chaos, anticipate behavior, and measure human reaction. The man's origins were unknown, or perhaps deliberately obscured. Rumors spread quickly along the wharves. Some said he had been a prodigy, stolen from a family of scholars. Others whispered that he had taught himself to read, to write, to calculate complex sums in his head, while still enduring the brutality of plantation labor. A few even suggested something more extraordinary, that he had been trained in multiple languages, had memorized texts forbidden to the enslaved, and could solve problems that confounded the most educated men in Galveston. These stories, whether true or exaggerated, began to circulate because in a place built on profit and control, such anomalies were noticed immediately. Traders do not like uncertainty, especially when it is wrapped in brilliance. His arrival caused a stir that traders tried to mask as casual interest. They exchanged glances, pretending to inspect cargo, while studying him silently. The other enslaved people, who had been through the system for years, whispered among themselves, their eyes wide with awe or fear. Intelligence in a slave was not celebrated, it was feared. For if a mind could not be broken, the foundation of obedience could be questioned. Every word, every glance, every subtle movement was a challenge to those who relied on fear as law. The docks of Galveston had seen countless auctions. Men and women had been sold for decades, each transaction reducing a human being to a ledger entry. But this man, because he refused to be reduced, introduced uncertainty. Traders who were accustomed to routine began hesitating. A simple transaction, usually mechanical and unemotional, suddenly became fraught. Bidding slowed. Some buyers withdrew entirely, claiming to have seen enough. Others offered unusually high sums, hoping to secure such a rare commodity before anyone else recognized its value. Yet the same intelligence that commanded attention also commanded caution. Questions arose. Will he obey? Will he adapt? Or will he resist? No one could answer. Even the seasoned auctioneers, men who had spent their lives orchestrating the sale of humans, noticed the difference. They reported seeing a composure that was impossible to feign. When he walked to the block, his steps were measured, his posture impeccable. His voice, when he answered questions, carried calm assurance. There was no fear, no desperation. This was a man who had internalized the rules of the game without surrendering his mind to them, a paradox that unsettled everyone who witnessed it. Traders whispered to each other in corners, speculating, how can he be so obedient and yet so untouchable? The port of Galveston itself, a place accustomed to cruelty and control, seemed to acknowledge the anomaly. The sun rose and fell over the harbor as it always did. Ships came and went, markets thrived, and yet a subtle tension permeated the air. Those who had been present during his inspection recalled the unease vividly. Even the children who ran along the wharves, playing between the masts and warehouses, sensed the difference. This man moved among them like any other, yet he belonged to no one. He was present physically, but mentally he remained unclaimed. The port, with all its machinery of oppression, could not quite contain him. It is difficult to describe the psychological atmosphere surrounding his first auction. Fear, curiosity, and greed collided in the minds of those present. Onlookers felt the strangeness immediately. The man's intelligence radiated not through boastfulness, but through quiet observation. Traders tried to anticipate his responses, but they could not. He answered every question accurately, yet without eagerness or submission. He understood the value system he was part of, but never let it define him. In effect, he became the enigma at the center of a system built entirely on predictability. For Galveston, a port where every human transaction was calculated to the penny, this unpredictability was revolutionary. Even as he was being appraised, others around him took note. The precise way he studied each trader, calculating mannerisms, the way he responded to questions, often answering more than asked, the subtle signals he gave with gestures or posture, revealing comprehension beyond basic literacy. Observers who were experts in human behavior, overseers, buyers, and seasoned traders, were unnerved. They had seen confidence before. They had seen cunning. They had never seen a mind entirely unbroken by the system it was forced into. The mere presence of such intelligence created anxiety. It threatened assumptions, disturbed patterns, and exposed the fragility of control. As the first bids were made, the tension grew. Traders who had once moved mechanically now hesitated. Buyers spoke in subdued tones, their calculations complicated by the man's aura of comprehension. Every transaction in Galveston was normally predictable, yet here, unpredictable. Ability dominated. Bids rose not just with value, but with fear. Everyone wanted him, yet no one felt certain they could handle him. And this was just the beginning. Those present sensed that the auctions of 1859 in Galveston would remember this man, not for the price he fetched, but for the questions he raised about intelligence, control, and human will. He was, in every sense, a mystery, a puzzle that the slave trading system could neither solve nor ignore. And as the sun set over the harbor, painting the water in streaks of gold and crimson. One truth became undeniable. Galveston, 1859, had seen many slaves, many strong, many skilled, many obedient. But this man, this singular mind, was something entirely different, something impossible. And history, as always, would struggle to contain the story of someone who refused to fit into the ledger. The docks of Galveston had seen hundreds of enslaved men and women pass through their creaking planks. Each arrival was catalogued, assessed, and priced according to muscle, age, and obedience. Yet amid this grim procession, one man stood out, not by stature, not by appearance, but by a quality far more insidious to the minds of traders: intelligence. From the moment he stepped onto the wharf, those around him noticed it. There was a precision in his movements, a calm awareness that suggested he had already calculated the behaviors of every observer, every trader, every overseer within range. He did not flinch when shouted at. He did not fidget under inspection. His gaze was steady, analytical, taking in details others considered irrelevant: the worn patterns on a trader's boots, the subtle twitch in a hand that signaled impatience, the spacing of shadows that revealed where a secret might be hidden. Traders whispered among themselves. It was not unusual for slaves to be alert, to notice subtle cues. But this man was different. He did not merely observe, he processed, predicted, and adapted. Where others would be broken by fear or made submissive through expectation, he moved as though the system existed outside of him, like a game whose rules were meant to be noted, but not necessarily followed. Even his speech was remarkable. When questioned, he answered directly, confidently, and without hesitation. His voice carried authority unusual for someone in his position. He knew not just how to respond, but how to phrase responses to reveal as little as possible while demonstrating his abilities. When asked if he could read, he recited passages of the Bible flawlessly, then added commentary in perfect grammar and with a clarity that startled the auctioneers. When asked about numbers, he solved complex sums in his head, faster than many men who had spent years in formal schooling. Whispers spread among the buyers. Some leaned toward the auctioneer, murmuring quietly, "Where did he learn so much?" Others exchanged uneasy glances, unsure if intelligence in an enslaved man was a boon or a threat. It was one thing for a raider to purchase a strong arm or a skilled hand. Those were predictable assets. But intelligence? Intelligence was unpredictable. Intelligence could resist, evade, manipulate, and even outthink its owners. It was a double-edged sword, and everyone understood that sharp edges cut both ways. The man's awareness extended beyond immediate observation. He noted relationships, alliances, and hierarchies among traders, observing who deferred to whom, who feared whom, and who concealed secrets. He learned quickly which buyers were greedy, which ones were cautious, and which were likely to be intimidated by his demeanor. In effect, he was reading the market before any bidding began, a skill no ledger could quantify, no price could capture. Yet, despite all this, he was careful. Intelligence was dangerous in his position. Display it too boldly, and he would become a target. Underestimate it, and he could end up sold to the wrong buyer, or worse. So he moderated his expressions, calibrated his reactions, and adapted his posture with precision. Every gesture was intentional, every step was measured, and yet, even in this calculated restraint, something about him radiated an unmistakable sense of capability, of depth, of mind unbroken. The other enslaved people noticed it too. They whispered quietly among themselves. "He isn't like the rest," they said. "He knows things." Some feared him, some revered him. Few dared to approach, fewer still dared to ask questions. In a world built on obedience, intelligence was both shield and weapon. Those who possessed it had a power that was invisible, unquantifiable, yet undeniable. Buyers began to hesitate during the auction. Normally the proceedings were mechanical. One by one, men and women were brought to the block, inspected, appraised, and sold. But this man, this anomaly, disrupted the rhythm. Traders paused before bidding, unsure whether to compete for him, hesitant to offer too much, wary of the implications. His intelligence created uncertainty, and uncertainty is dangerous in a market built on certainty. One particular trader, a man known for his shrewd calculations and ruthless efficiency, leaned close to the auctioneer. "I've sold many strong men," he murmured. "I've bought many skilled hands. But this one, I cannot tell what he will do. He may obey, or he may undo everything we think we control." His words were hushed, but the meaning was clear. Intelligence in a slave was a liability. It could never be fully contained, and no one could predict its limits. The man's intellect was not confined to academics or observation. He had a remarkable ability to manipulate perception. During inspection, he would allow buyers to notice certain skills while concealing others, offering a glimpse of his abilities without revealing their full scope. It was a form of psychological negotiation, an unspoken assertion of control over the moment. Buyers felt both impressed and unsettled. They wanted to own him, yet they feared the consequences of doing so. Even the auctioneer, a man accustomed to controlling proceedings with precision and authority, struggled to maintain composure. He had seen brilliance before, but never in someone whose status was supposed to render them powerless. Normally, auctioneers could predict reactions, enforce rules, and guide bidding. But here, the script seemed to falter. The man's presence introduced an element of uncertainty, subtle yet profound. Every word, every gesture, every pause was a puzzle the auctioneer had not anticipated. And then there was his demeanor toward the other enslaved individuals. While some exhibited fear or submission, he showed a calm assertiveness, not arrogance, not rebellion, but an unmistakable awareness of both the injustice around him and the limitations imposed by it. He observed without judgment, yet his very observations suggested comprehension and foresight. Those who looked closely might have seen a quiet defiance, a signal that, even within chains, the mind could remain free. Rumors began to circulate rapidly through the port. Among traders, among buyers, and even among the enslaved, stories emerged of a man who could solve impossible calculations in his head, who could recite long passages of scripture from memory, who spoke multiple languages, and who understood human behavior with uncanny accuracy. Some claimed he had been educated in secret, others speculated that he was a prodigy stolen from a free family. All agreed on one point: he was different. He did not fit the ledger, he did not conform to expectations, he was not a commodity to be priced or appraised with certainty. This intelligence created tension among the buyers. Those with experience understood that unpredictability in a slave could lead to disaster, yet the allure of talent and skill was too tempting to resist. Bids began cautiously, then escalated as competition grew. But the underlying fear never dissipated. Each buyer asked themselves the same question: can this man be contained? Will he comply? Or is he too intelligent for our control? Even as he was being sold, he maintained composure. He understood the rules of the game, yet he did not allow them to define him. Every answer was measured. Every gesture was deliberate. And in this delicate balance he demonstrated a mastery of both self and circumstance. The auction became more than a transaction. It became a psychological test, a study in human interaction, and a demonstration of the limits of control. Observers would later recall the tension on the docks that day. Traders who had witnessed countless auctions admitted that this one felt different. There was an electricity in the air, a subtle acknowledgement that something extraordinary was occurring. The man's intelligence challenged assumptions, disrupted routines, and forced everyone to reconsider the very nature of the human cargo they had long treated as property. As he was led away, purchased by a buyer who dared the risk, wisp. Ayres continued. Questions lingered. Where did he learn so much? What could he accomplish under such circumstances? Could intelligence survive within the confines of slavery? Or would it inevitably be broken? These questions haunted those who had witnessed the auction. They were not merely concerned with his abilities. They were concerned with what his abilities implied about the system itself. This man's intelligence, subtle yet undeniable, made him more than just a curiosity. It made him a threat, to traders, to owners, and to anyone who believed that submission was absolute. In a port built on the systematic appraisal and control of human beings, he was an anomaly, a mind too sharp, too aware, too adaptable to be fully contained. And it was precisely this intelligence that would define the rest of his story, shaping every decision, every interaction, and every whisper in the years to come. For the people of Galveston, the auction of 1859 would be remembered not for the price he fetched, but for the impossible presence of a man whose mind refused to fit the ledger, a man whose intelligence was his own, untouchable and unknowable, leaving a lingering unease on the docks, in the minds of traders, and in the very fabric of a system that had relied on certainty for so long. By the time the sun rose fully over Galveston Harbor in 1859, The man who had captured every whisper on the docks had become the subject of more speculation than any other enslaved person to pass through the port that year. Traders, buyers, and even seasoned auctioneers had begun to acknowledge a truth they did not dare speak aloud. This man was too intelligent to be understood, and intelligence in the world of slavery was dangerous. From the first moment he had stepped onto the wharf, his presence had disrupted the expected rhythm of the marketplace. Other enslaved men and women were measured and priced with cold efficiency. Muscle, age, gender, skill, these were variables easily catalogued. Fear and obedience were constants, taken for granted, assumed. But with him, no assumption could stand. He observed, calculated, and projected awareness in ways that unsettled even the most experienced traders. Each step he took was deliberate, each answer precise, and yet every action seemed to hint at depths that could never be fully known. It did not take long for whispers to spread among the buyers. "He is clever beyond reason," one remarked, glancing sideways as if speaking too loudly could provoke the intelligence he feared. "I do not trust him," said another, his voice low. "I have bought many men who were strong, who were capable, who would bend to instruction. But this one, I do not know where he will go or what he will do once owned." Intelligence in the context of the slave trade was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it promised value. A man who could solve complex problems, who understood people, who could learn skills with astonishing speed, was worth far more than someone who relied solely on muscle. Traders recognized this immediately. The auctioneer had already started the bidding at an unusually high level, acknowledging the rarity of what he called a man unlike any other in Galveston. But value alone did not guarantee comfort. Intelligence, especially when combined with composure and awareness, introduced an element of unpredictability. The more capable the mind, the less certain a buyer could be that it would submit fully to the system. Unlike strength, which could be tested through labor, or obedience, which could be demanded through punishment, intellect could evade, manipulate, and resist without ever appearing to do so. Every calculated movement, every subtle gesture was a question, a challenge to the assumptions of those who sought to own him. Traders began to act differently. Some hesitated, whispering warnings to one another, unwilling to bid too high for fear of being outwitted. Others, driven by greed or ambition, were determined to acquire him at any cost, believing that the risk of intelligence could be mitigated through strict supervision and careful control. Yet even the most confident buyers admitted privately that they could not predict the outcome. "I do not know if I am buying a man," one said, "or a storm waiting to happen." As the auction progressed, tension on the docks became palpable. Normally, bidding was mechanical, predictable. Buyers knew their limits, knew the value of muscle and obedience, and transactions proceeded efficiently. But with him, uncertainty dominated every exchange. Each bid was accompanied by a calculation not only of price but of potential consequences. Could his intelligence be harnessed? Could it be broken? Or would it ultimately undermine the buyer's control, turning an asset into a liability? Even the auctioneer, a man with decades of experience orchestrating sales, struggled to maintain authority. He had seen prodigious skills before, but none that combined comprehension, calculation, and composure so completely. Each time the man answered a question, his calm clarity sent ripples of unease through the crowd. Every demonstration of skill, whether in arithmetic, language, or understanding human behavior, magnified the risk in the eyes of potential buyers. Some turned away, muttering excuses about the price or claiming they had enough laborers. Others bid aggressively, determined to secure the anomaly, unwilling to admit fear. The most experienced traders began to realize that his value was not purely economic, it was psychological. To own a man like this was to assume control over a mind that might never fully submit. It was to gamble with human cognition itself, to place oneself in a position where intelligence could challenge authority, evade punishment, and disrupt expectations. Yet the allure of intelligence in a market dominated by predictable labor was irresistible. To possess him could mean immense advantage: an overseer, a strategist, a problem solver, a man who could do more with thought than others could with strength. Buyers began to strategize in new ways. They whispered among themselves, sharing observations about his demeanor, attempting to predict which qualities might be most difficult to manage. They debated whether intelligence could be mitigated with strict labor, isolation, or surveillance. Some proposed assigning him to complex work where his talents could be contained and directed. Others argued that even the most elaborate controls could fail if he chose to resist internally, maintaining autonomy in ways that could not be punished or measured. As speculation grew, the man remained composed, aware of the attention yet revealing nothing. He answered questions honestly but without excess, displaying skill without arrogance. He measured every gesture, calculated every step, and maintained a calm that unsettled the very people who sought to control him. Traders were drawn to him yet simultaneously wary. Each bid was a test, not just of wealth, but of courage, of willingness to take a risk that no ledger could quantify. Rumors spread beyond the immediate auction. Word traveled quickly through Galveston's port, carried by dockhands, sailors, and those who had witnessed the spectacle. Tales of his intelligence took on almost mythical qualities. Some claimed he could read multiple languages. Others whispered that he had memorized texts forbidden to the enslaved. A few suggested he could manipulate people with subtle gestures and words, predicting behavior before it occurred. None of these accounts could be verified, yet all agreed on a single point: he was exceptional, extraordinary, and entirely unpredictable. This reputation created a feedback loop. As rumors spread, interest grew, and with interest came both greed and fear. Buyers competed for him, but not without hesitation. Every bid carried a silent question: can this intelligence be controlled? The auction was no longer merely a transaction, it had become a psychological contest, a demonstration of how fear, ambition, and respect could coexist uneasily in a market built on control. Even within the enslaved community, the man's intelligence was noticed. Other slaves watched him with a mixture of awe, fear, and hope. Some wondered if his abilities could offer protection or advantage. Others feared that his visibility might attract stricter control, punishment, or scrutiny. Yet all understood one truth: intelligence was both a gift and a danger in a system designed to suppress thought. The auctioneer, sensing the tension, attempted to maintain order, but even he could not fully mitigate the uncertainty. Normally, authority and ritual could smooth bidding, reassure buyers, and maintain the illusion of control. Here, every gesture, every response, and every pause was a disruption. The man's intelligence had become a force in itself, reshaping the expectations and behavior of those around him. Eventually, the bids reached a level that reflected both value and risk. The winning buyer was not necessarily the one who offered the most money, but the one willing to assume the uncertainty, to accept the potential consequences of owning a man whose mind was uncontainable. The transaction was completed, yet the whispers did not stop. Questions lingered in every corner of the port. Will he submit? Can he be managed? Or is he too clever to ever be owned? The true value of the man, the traders realized, was not just in labor or skill, it was in intelligence itself, in the ability to observe, adapt, and maintain autonomy even within a system designed to enforce obedience. It was a quality that could not be catalogued, priced, or fully understood, and that, in the context of Galveston's 1859 slave market, made him both invaluable and terrifying. As he was led away, the port of Galveston returned to routine, yet a subtle tension remained in the air. Buyers, traders, and auctioneers could not forget him. He had demonstrated that intelligence could survive chains, evade calculation, and disrupt expectations. And in doing so, he left behind an indelible mark on the port, on the marketplace, and on the collective consciousness of those who had witnessed something impossible, a mind that refused to be contained. It was clear to all who observed him that his story would not end with a simple sale. His intelligence was too vast, too aware, and too resilient. It had set him apart in a world designed to suppress thought, and it would continue to define him in ways that no ledger, no auction, and no trader could fully control. He was a man too valuable to be trusted, and that, more than anything, would dictate the next chapter of his life, the challenges he would face, and the mysteries that would follow him for decades to come. The day of the auction arrived with an unusual tension that Galveston's docks had rarely experienced. The harbor was alive with the familiar sounds of commerce, the creaking of ship hulls, the rhythmic slap of oars against water, the shouted prices of traders haggling over cargo. But beneath the usual bustle, there was something different in the air. Whispers moved like currents across the planks of the docks. People leaned closer, speaking just above the wind, as if to acknowledge a truth too dangerous to announce openly. The man who had captured the port's attention was about to be sold, and no one knew what would happen. For days prior, the man's reputation had spread through Galveston. Traders debated his abilities and origins. Rumors circulated that he could read multiple languages, calculate sums mentally faster than any clerk, and understand human behavior in ways that seemed almost supernatural. Some questioned whether such intelligence could even belong to a man who had been enslaved, and in their doubt, unease festered. To own him meant more than simply acquiring labor. It meant managing a mind that could potentially resist, manipulate, or disrupt the very authority that defy. The auction itself, the auction block, usually a place of predictable transactions, became a stage for an unprecedented psychological struggle. Buyers assembled in hushed anticipation, their eyes calculating both value and risk. Some approached confidently, believing that wealth could buy control. Others lingered at the edges, wary of what they could not predict. The auctioneer, a man of decades' experience, attempted to maintain order, yet even he felt the subtle tremor of uncertainty that radiated from the crowd and, most of all, from the man standing before him. When the man stepped onto the block, the world seemed to pause. He moved with a controlled grace, a precision in his posture that suggested awareness beyond ordinary comprehension. Every step was deliberate, every gesture calculated. He answered questions with clarity, offering only what was necessary, never more, never less. His intelligence was visible not in arrogance but in the quiet command of presence. For those gathered, it was as if the auction had transformed from a transaction into a test, one that no ledger, no price, and no tradition could fully quantify. The bidding began as expected, cautious, methodical, tentative. Buyers evaluated his physical capabilities, his skills, and the rumors of his intellect. But soon, the intelligence that had made him valuable began to disrupt the process. One question posed by a buyer, a simple inquiry about his literacy, unfolded into a demonstration so complete and articulate that even seasoned traders were taken aback. He recited passages with exact pronunciation, then explained meaning, context, and nuance in a way that revealed comprehension far beyond anything the buyers had anticipated. Suddenly, the auction was no longer about who could offer the highest price for labor or obedience. It became a contest of judgment, strategy, and courage. Bidders hesitated, unsure whether to proceed. Some whispered to one another, debating whether intelligence could be broken, whether compliance could be guaranteed, or whether they risked acquiring a man who could outthink and outmaneuver them at every turn. Every raised paddle became a gamble, every offer a calculated risk. The tension escalated when the man asked a question himself, a single, pointed inquiry that revealed his comprehension of the auctioneer's methods and the intentions of the buyers. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was enough to unsettle the proceedings. Traders shifted uneasily in their seats. Some lowered their eyes, considering whether to withdraw. Others bid more aggressively, determined not to allow anyone else to claim such a rare asset. Yet beneath the surface, fear mingled with greed, creating a volatile atmosphere that had never before existed in Galveston's auction houses. As bidding continued, the unusual dynamic became increasingly apparent. Normally, the auctioneer controlled the pace, guiding transactions with practiced authority. Here, however, the man's intelligence had disrupted the expected hierarchy. Buyers could no longer act purely on impulse or calculation. They had to account for unpredictability, for insight, for the possibility that the man could anticipate their actions. In effect, the auction had become a psychological duel, with the man at the center, quietly asserting influence over those who believed themselves in control. Even the observers among the enslaved population noticed the tension. They whispered among themselves, eyes wide with a mixture of awe and fear. Intelligence in a slave was rarely recognized publicly, and when it was, it created unease. For the enslaved, the man's abilities were both inspiring and dangerous. Some wondered if his presence could offer protection or advantage. Others feared that his visibility might invite stricter scrutiny or harsher treatment. Yet all recognized a single truth: he was different, and difference in that world was a force that could not be ignored. At one point, the auction seemed to falter entirely. A buyer, confident in his understanding of the market, attempted to bid aggressively. The man's calm response, a measured glance, a subtle gesture, an expression of comprehension, sent a ripple of doubt through the room. Other buyers paused, reassessing not just the value but the risk. The auctioneer attempted to regain control, raising his voice, calling for bids, insisting on pace. Yet the usual authority of ritual and repetition could not reassert itself. Intelligence had disrupted expectation, and with it, control. Rumors about the man's origins intensified during the auction. Some claimed he had been trained secretly, taught to read, write, and calculate in ways that defied the reality of the plantations. Others suggested he had been educated abroad or belonged to a family of scholars before being stolen. These speculations only increased the anxiety of the buyers. In a market built on predictability, a mind whose history was uncertain was inherently dangerous. No contract, no surveillance, no punishment could guarantee compliance when the intelligence of the enslaved was itself a variable beyond control. The climax of the auction arrived when the bidding reached a level that reflected both value and apprehension. Buyers hesitated on the brink, weighing the cost against the potential consequences. The man's composure never wavered. Each bid he observed, each gesture he made, was a subtle communication, a demonstration of awareness, of calculation, of comprehension. The buyers, though wealthy and experienced, found themselves negotiating not just price, but uncertainty itself. In the end, the auction concluded not with triumph, but with unease. The winning bidder had acquired a man whose intelligence made him invaluable, yet impossible to fully trust. Observers left the docks murmuring about what they had witnessed. The auction had not been merely a sale, it had been a revelation. Intelligence, in its quiet, steadfast presence, had shaped the dynamics of the marketplace, exposing vulnerabilities in a system designed to assume compliance. The man was led away, calm, composed, aware. Traders, buyers, and auctioneers remained on the docks, silently acknowledging the truth they could not speak aloud. Intelligence in slavery was a force that could not be quantified, priced, or controlled. It created fear even as it created value, and it introduced uncertainty into a market that depended on predictability. The auction had gone wrong, not because the man misbehaved, but because he refused to be reduced to a predictable commodity. Stories of the auction spread quickly through Galveston. Dockhands, sailors, and traders retold the events in hushed tones, emphasizing the man's intelligence, composure, and subtle dominance over the proceedings. Each retelling added nuance, creating a legend that would endure long after the details were forgotten. Even among the enslaved, the story circulated, inspiring awe and fear in equal measure. The auction's impact extended beyond the immediate sale. Buyers began to reconsider the value of intelligence in the enslaved population, not merely as skill to be exploited, but as a variable to be feared. Control, they realized, was not guaranteed by chains or supervision when a mind refused to submit. Observers took note. The man's presence had changed the rules of engagement, forcing them to confront the reality that intelligence could not be measured in dollars, nor obedience assumed, nor submission guaranteed. In this way, the auction became legendary, not for the price fetched, nor for the buyer who won, but for the impossible presence of a mind that refused to be contained. Galveston's docks had witnessed countless transactions, but never one like this. The man had not broken the law, nor had he disobeyed the rules, yet through subtlety, composure, and unassailable intelligence, he had disrupted the very system designed to control him. For historians and storytellers who would come after, the auction of 1859 became emblematic of the tension between value and danger, obedience and autonomy, control and intellect. It illustrated a truth that many would prefer to forget. Intelligence in the enslaved could not be confined, predicted, or fully controlled. It was a force that shaped behavior, challenged authority, and introduced uncertainty into a system built on certainty. As the day faded and the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the harbor, the auction left behind an enduring question. How could a system that depended on obedience survive when confronted with a mind that refused to obey? The answer, at the time, was unknown. All that was certain was that the man, calm, intelligent, and unbroken, had rewritten the rules of the marketplace simply by being who he was. The day after the auction, Galveston's port returned to its usual rhythm. Ships unloaded cargo, merchants haggled over goods, and the sun cast its golden haze across the docks. Yet, amidst the ordinary bustle, a quiet tension lingered. The man, bought at an unprecedented sum, had been removed from the auction block, but the implications of his presence reverberated far beyond the wharves. He was no longer a spectacle for traders or buyers. He had become a possession, an asset to be controlled. And yet, those who now claimed ownership quickly discovered that some forces, particularly intelligence and awareness, could not be contained by money or chains. From the moment he entered his new owner's estate, he observed everything with meticulous precision. His awareness extended to every aspect of the household: the movements of the overseers, the routines of the guards, the hierarchy among the other enslaved individuals. Each glance, each gesture, each word spoken in his presence became data. He memorized patterns: who tolerated correction and who administered it with severity, who whispered to whom in the shadows, and which rules could be bent without consequence. To the untrained eye, he appeared compliant, but beneath the surface, his mind was calculating, adapting, and learning. Control was attempted immediately. Owners, eager to assert dominance over a commodity that had already caused widespread unease, imposed strict routines. Labor was monitored with intensity, rules were enforced with rigor, and obedience was demanded without exception. Yet no punishment, no isolation, no reprimand could fracture the man's composure. He complied in appearance, executing every task with precision, but he did so without surrendering the autonomy of his mind. In effect, he had mastered the art of performance, outward obedience coupled with inner freedom. This duality, the coexistence of submission and sovereignty, was profoundly unsettling to those around him. Overseers, accustomed to control through fear and authority, began noticing subtle signs that something was amiss. Tasks were completed flawlessly, yet the manner in which they were performed suggested deliberation, calculation, and self-determination. Orders were followed, yet the execution was always slightly unconventional, imperceptibly different from expectation. It was a silent assertion: he would comply, but he would not submit. Among the other enslaved individuals, his presence elicited a mixture of awe, curiosity, and hope. Some watched him in secret, learning how to navigate the oppressive system without surrendering themselves entirely. Others were wary, recognizing that attention could bring punishment. Yet all could sense that this man had discovered a truth that many longed to understand: it was possible to endure slavery without allowing it to erase one's identity. He demonstrated that the mind could remain untouchable even when the body was constrained. His intelligence also manifested in practical ways that unsettled his owner. Tasks that had previously taken hours to complete were executed with efficiency and insight. Problems that baffled overseers, repairing equipment, organizing labor, managing schedules, were solved with calm precision. The estate benefited materially from his abilities, yet the very usefulness of his mind was a source of unease. Here was a man whose intellect could be exploited, but whose comprehension of the power dynamics meant that exploitation could never be total. His owner realized, consciously or unconsciously, that he had acquired more than a laborer. He had acquired a force that could challenge authority in ways both subtle and profound. Attempts to test his limits were inevitable. Overseers tried to provoke disobedience, to elicit fear, to expose any sign of vulnerability that could be used to assert control. But the man anticipated these maneuvers, responding with precision that neutralized the intent behind them. A harsh word would be met with calm acknowledgement. A sudden correction would be met with exact compliance, but without deference. The psychological control tactics that had worked on others failed here because he understood their purpose and refused to grant them power over his inner self. Even small acts of resistance carried weight: a pause slightly longer than expected in a response, a deliberate choice of phrasing, a slight hesitation before movement. Each was imperceptible to the casual observer, yet each was a declaration of mental autonomy. He navigated the boundaries imposed by the estate's rules so skillfully that punishment was avoided, yet his control over perception remained intact. Intelligence, it became clear, could be a weapon as subtle as it was powerful, capable of asserting independence without inviting direct reprisal. The man's understanding of human behavior extended beyond strategy and compliance. He recognized the motivations, fears, and desires of those around him. Guards and overseers could be subtly influenced by gestures, tones, and carefully chosen words. Fellow slaves could be protected or assisted through discreet signals. Even the owner, though unaware of the extent, found that his instructions were executed flawlessly, yet on the man's terms, shaped by foresight and calculation. It was a form of quiet sovereignty. He had adapted to the system, yet he controlled the terms of engagement. Stories of his intellect and composure began to spread quietly, even within the estate. Some enslaved people shared accounts of his problem-solving skills, his strategic thinking, and his ability to anticipate the actions of the overseers. These stories inspired hope. illustrating that autonomy was possible even under extreme oppression. Others, however, whispered with caution, aware that attention could provoke punishment. The man's presence became a silent lesson in resilience. Intelligence was both survival and defiance. Over time, the psychological impact on his owner became evident. The very traits that made him valuable, skill, efficiency, intelligence, also made him difficult to fully control. The owner attempted increasingly complex tacti, CS to assert dominance, tighter supervision, arbitrary tasks, heightened scrutiny. Yet none succeeded in breaking the man's mental composure. Compliance was never absent, but autonomy remained. The owner realized, consciously or unconsciously, that he had acquired not just a laborer, but a mind that could not be fully owned. Even routine tasks became opportunities for subtle mastery. The man approached labor strategically, organizing efforts efficiently, identifying ways to conserve energy and maximize output without overstepping boundaries. Others noticed and adapted, learning from him in secret. Intelligence was contagious, even in an environment designed to suppress it. By maintaining control over his mind while executing outwardly compliant actions, he introduced a form of quiet leadership that others could emulate without detection. Despite the pressures of the estate, the man's inner life remained intact. He continued to observe, to calculate, and to learn. He anticipated consequences before they arrived, adjusted strategies in real time, and preserved his identity against a system built to erase it. In doing so, he demonstrated that intelligence was not merely a skill, it was a survival mechanism. Awareness, composure, and foresight became his armor, protecting him in a world where fear and submission were expected. At night, when the estate was quiet, he reflected on the implications of his situation. He understood that overt resistance would be fatal. Yet he also recognized that subtle, deliberate navigation of the system allowed him to retain autonomy. Every calculation, every gesture, every decision was a balance between survival and sovereignty. Intelligence, he realized, was not just power. It was freedom concealed in plain sight. Over weeks and months, the man's presence reshaped the dynamics of the estate. Overseers grew cautious, unsure whether their authority was fully respected. The owner experienced both benefit and unease, recognizing the value of a mind that could solve complex problems, yet sensing the impossibility of total control. Fellow slaves observed, learned, and adapted strategies of subtle autonomy, inspired by a man who had proven that obedience could coexist with inner freedom. By refusing to submit fully, the man achieved something extraordinary. He demonstrated that intelligence could persist under conditions designed to suppress it. He proved that autonomy was possible even within extreme constraint. He unsettled those who sought to dominate him, and inspired those who had been dominated for years, and through it all, he maintained the delicate balance of compliance and sovereignty, showing that the mind could remain untouchable even when the body was enslaved. In retrospect, this phase of his life marked a turning point. The auction had introduced him to the system, ownership had tested him within it, and through intelligence, awareness, and strategic subtlety, he navigated the impossible, thriving mentally, adapting socially, and preserving autonomy under conditions meant to enforce submission. It was a demonstration that power, in its truest form, need not be loud or confrontational. Sometimes it was quiet, calculated, and invisible, but no less potent. The estate's observers, buyers, and overseers would never forget the presence of this man. Though they could measure labor and productivity, they could not measure intelligence. Though they could impose rules and punishments, they could not compel insight, awareness, or foresight. And though they could attempt to control his actions, they could not dominate his mind. In every sense, he had turned the expectations of the enslavers on their head, becoming both an asset and a source of unease, a man too valuable to be trusted, too intelligent to be broken, and too aware to be controlled. The months following his acquisition by a buyer in Galveston were marked not only by his quiet mastery of the estate but also by an increasingly strange phenomenon: the disappearance, distortion, and manipulation of records concerning him. In a world built on ledgers, contracts, and meticulous documentation, a man's worth was measured and controlled through paper. Yet in his case, the very records meant to define him seemed to slip from the hands of those who attempted to assert authority. Initially, the estate's ledgers recorded his purchase and the agreed-upon price, along with notes regarding age, height, skill, and perceived obedience. These entries were standard in form, meant to be factual and precise. Yet as weeks passed, anomalies began appearing. Notes describing his abilities were contradictory. Some praised his intelligence as extraordinary, while others dismissed him as capable but unremarkable. Measurements, dates, and even the spelling of his name varied between documents, as if no single account could capture the totality of his existence. Historians who later attempted to trace his life encountered the same phenomenon. Shipping records listed him under different names, sometimes as part of larger groups, sometimes as an individual whose origins were unclear. Letters exchanged between traders referenced him in vague, cautious terms. The man of remarkable aptitude, the one whose mind unsettles, the individual beyond calculation. No details were provided that could allow certainty about his fate, his skills, or even the specific transactions he was involved in. It was as if intelligence itself could not be constrained by ink and paper. Whispers circulated among those who had witnessed him at the auction and in the estate. Dockhands, overseers, and other enslaved individuals shared fragmented stories, each version slightly different from the last. Some claimed he had been sold to a prominent plantation owner who recognized his potential for extraordinary labor. Others whispered that he had escaped in secret, aided by sympathetic hands, disappearing into the shadows of Texas's vast terrain. Still others suggested that he had been deliberately misrecorded, entered into the wrong ledger to conceal his abilities from potential rivals. Every tale contained a grain of truth, yet none could be verified. These discrepancies were compounded by the legal and bureaucratic structures of the time. Shipping manifests, sale documents, and estate ledgers were often incomplete or deliberately altered. Buyers sought to protect valuable assets from theft or misrepresentation, and a man whose intelligence challenged assumptions was particularly susceptible to being lost in documentation. Contracts were vague, sometimes referencing only a laborer of extraordinary capacity, without naming him directly. The very systems designed to assert control over human lives became unreliable when confronted with a mind that could outthink, anticipate, and manipulate outcomes. Even letters between traders reflected uncertainty. Some contained subtle warnings: "He is not as others, caution is advised." Others conveyed admiration, almost incredulity. "His mind is unlike anything we have encountered." The tone varied widely, as if intelligence itself caused unease that could not be codified. Traders were unsure whether to treat him as a commodity, a liability, or something closer to a mystery. And so, ambiguity became embedded in the historical record, leaving future generations with a puzzle that defied resolution. Conflicting accounts emerged in local newspapers, plantation records, and personal diaries. One document described him as the cleverest man ever seen in Galveston, capable of feats beyond comprehension, while another, authored by a cautious trader, minimized his abilities. "He is shrewd, yes, but nothing exceptional." These contradictions were not accidental. They reflected a fundamental tension. Intelligence in an enslaved individual was simultaneously a source of fascination, fear, and denial. Some writers exaggerated to create legend, while others downplayed him to avoid acknowledging the threat his intellect posed to the system. Stories of disappearance and escape further muddied the waters. Some witnesses claimed that he had vanished one night, leaving the estate without notice, guided by his own cunning and the aid of sympathetic individuals. Others maintained that he had been sold quietly, away from the public eye, perhaps to a buyer capable of appreciating his abilities without fear. Yet no definitive record confirmed either scenario. Like a shadow slipping between documented events, his movements evaded capture, leaving only traces in rumors, second-hand accounts, and incomplete ledgers. Even within the enslaved community, knowledge of his fate was fragmented. Those who had observed him closely at the estate shared different interpretations of his actions and intentions. Some believed he had found a way to subvert authority subtly, protecting himself and others without drawing attention. Others feared reprisal, convinced that any misstep could result in punishment. The lack of clarity created an aura of legend. He became not just a man, but a symbol of intelligence surviving within a system designed to erase it. Historians attempting to piece together his story centuries later faced the same challenges. Documents that should have provided clarity were incomplete, altered, or contradictory. Shipping records placed him on different vessels, in different states, and under different names. Plantation ledgers described his abilities inconsistently, sometimes overstating, sometimes minimizing. Letters referenced him cryptically, hinting at remarkable talent while refusing to provide specifics. And oral histories, passed down in fragments, added layers of myth and speculation. This absence of certainty highlights a profound truth about intelligence in the context of slavery. It was inherently uncontrollable, and attempts to define it on paper were doomed to failure. The man's mind could not be fully captured by ledgers or letters. It eluded classification, outmaneuvered those who attempted to restrict it, and left behind only traces of its presence. In a system dependent on predictability and obedience, his existence challenged assumptions and disrupted the very mechanisms of control. The ambiguity surrounding his life also served to protect him, intentionally or not. By slipping between records, by being misidentified or unrecorded, he avoided complete ownership of his story. His intelligence, which had caused anxiety among buyers and traders, now extended into the historical record itself. The more extraordinary and uncontainable he became, the harder it was for authorities and historians alike to pin him down. He became a figure suspended between documentation and myth, between the known and the unknowable. Even the legal documents related to his sale offer tantalizing contradictions. One set of records suggests a transfer to a plantation in Louisiana, while another places him on a Texas estate for an extended period. Letters hint at extraordinary labor, yet speak of compliance and obedience. Diaries from contemporaries offer scattered observations. He is unlike any I have seen, or I cannot fathom his understanding. Every source conveys admiration or fear, yet none can confirm location, fate, or actions with certainty. As the years passed, his story became increasingly enveloped in mystery. Scholars, historians, and storytellers have attempted to reconstruct his life, piecing together fragments from multiple sources. Each account offers a glimpse, yet the full picture remains elusive. It is this very elusiveness that defines him. A mind too intelligent to be fully documented, too perceptive to be entirely controlled, and too aware to be comprehended by those who sought to own him. Whispers in Galveston continued long after his departure. Dockhands, traders, and former overseers shared stories of a man whose intellect had altered expectations and disrupted systems. Some claimed he had escaped, vanishing without a trace. Others insisted he had been sold secretly, to someone capable of appreciating his abilities. The truth, obscured by missing records and contradictory accounts, became less important than the legend itself. The most intelligent man ever traded in Galveston, whose presence challenged the very foundations of slavery. In retrospect, the vanishing and manipulation of records serves as a testament to his mind. Intelligence, awareness, and autonomy are difficult to control, and perhaps impossible to capture fully in written documentation. His story demonstrates that even in a system designed to assert total ownership, the human mind could elude constraint. The ambiguity of his fate preserves a measure of his freedom, extending the influence of his intellect beyond the limitations of chains, auction blocks, and ledgers. Ultimately, the man's life in this phase is defined by contradiction, documented yet undocumented, present yet absent, obedient yet autonomous. He exists in historical memory as both fact and myth, a figure whose intelligence resisted quantification and whose fate remains uncertain. Whispers, records, and vanishing facts all serve to illustrate this same profound truth. He was, and remains, impossible to fully contain. The story of the most intelligent male slave ever traded in Galveston in 1859 has persisted through decades, shrouded in both fascination and ambiguity. Historians, amateur researchers, and storytellers have long debated the origins, fate, and even the nature of his extraordinary intellect. No single account provides certainty, and yet every fragment of evidence invites speculation. His life has become a nexus of mystery, historical anomaly, and intellectual curiosity, a case where the gaps between records speak as loudly as the records themselves. One of the most persistent questions concerns his origin. Some theories suggest he may have been born into relative freedom, or the household of a literate family, acquiring knowledge that was considered impossible for an enslaved individual at the time. Documents from the period hint at families displaced by conflict or economic hardship, who may have lost children to the slave trade. Could he have been the product of such circumstances, taken at a young age yet retaining cognitive skills that allowed him to learn and adapt rapidly? Scholars argue that the precision with which he processed information, calculating outcomes, reading social cues, and solving complex problems, points to early exposure to structured education, even if informal. Another possibility is that he acquired his abilities through mentorship or clandestine teaching while enslaved. Oral histories from former slaves and estate workers suggest that some enslaved individuals, despite the oppressive restrictions of the system, secretly shared literacy, numeracy, and knowledge. In hidden spaces, under cover of night, or through coded communication, knowledge could be passed from one person to another. The Galveston man's extraordinary intellect may have been cultivated in such a clandestine network, allowing him to navigate the harsh realities of slavery with strategies invisible to his oppressors. Some historians propose a more controversial theory, that his intelligence was innate, a prodigious anomaly that defied explanation. Accounts emphasize not only his knowledge of scripture and arithmetic, but also his ability to anticipate human behavior, assess risk, and manipulate perception. These are skills not easily taught in isolation, suggesting a level of cognitive ability far beyond what was typical, even among educated free men of the era. Observers described his composure under stress, his subtle resistance to authority, and his capacity to strategize in ways that consistently outmaneuvered those around him. Could nature have endowed him with such a mind, and circumstance allowed it to flourish against all odds? Equally mysterious is the question of his fate after leaving Galveston. Some records imply that he was sold to a plantation in Louisiana, where he continued to display remarkable aptitude. Other accounts suggest that he may have escaped, perhaps aided by sympathetic individuals who recognized his extraordinary abilities. The ambiguity is compounded by inconsistent documentation. Names vary, locations shift, and dates contradict. Letters and diaries from the period provide tantalizing glimpses of a man whose intellect and strategic thinking were unparalleled, yet no definitive record confirms his final whereabouts. In this sense, the mystery persists not just because of lost documentation, but because his intelligence allowed him to exist in ways that defied conventional tracking. Oral traditions offer another layer of speculation. Some communities in Texas and Louisiana passed down stories of a man who could think 2 steps ahead of everyone else, and who never allowed anyone to control his mind. These tales often feature details that align with the documented accounts of his auction and estate life, yet they also embellish, creating a legend that intertwines fact and folklore. Could these oral histories contain kernels of truth about his escape or continued influence, or are they mythologized interpretations, honoring his intellect while filling gaps left by missing records? Scholars continue to debate, highlighting the intersection of history and storytelling in preserving knowledge about individuals whose lives were systematically marginalized. A third major theory addresses his intelligence as a tool of survival and subtle resistance. Observers at the time noted that he maintained perfect composure under scrutiny, obeyed orders while never surrendering autonomy, and subtly influenced the behavior of overseers and other enslaved individuals. This behavior may reflect a deliberate strategy, an understanding that intelligence could protect him while preserving freedom of mind. By performing compliance externally and maintaining sovereignty internally, he mastered a form of psychological resistance rarely documented in the historical record. This theory emphasizes that his intellect was not merely extraordinary, it was adaptive, shaped by the imperatives of survival under extreme oppression. Some researchers also speculate that his intellect allowed him to manipulate documentation, intentionally or indirectly, to preserve anonymity and evade control. The inconsistencies in ledgers, shipping manifests, and letters could reflect not only bureaucratic negligence, but also his subtle intervention. If he recognized that being misrecorded, relocated, or misidentified could protect him, he may have used observation, persuasion, or even coded communication to ensure that his true identity remained obscured. This theory paints him not just as intelligent, but as strategically cunning, capable of leveraging the very tools designed to contain him for his own protection. Psychological analysis adds yet another dimension. Modern scholars examining historical accounts suggest that the man's composure, strategic thinking, and anticipation of human behavior reflect what might now be recognized as high emotional intelligence. He understood not only facts and numbers but motivations, fears, and desires. He could manipulate perception without detection, manage complex social dynamics, and maintain resilience under stress. Such abilities are exceptional even in free societies, let alone within the extreme constraints of 19th-century slavery. His intelligence, in this view, was multidimensional, cognitive, emotional, and strategic. A related theory involves the impact he had on those around him. Witnesses consistently noted that overseers, traders, and owners were unsettled by his abilities. Other enslaved individuals observed and adapted, learning strategies of subtle resistance from his example. The man's intellect, therefore, may have had ripple effects beyond his own survival. It influenced the behavior of multiple individuals, challenged authority structures, and subtly altered the power dynamics of the estate. In this sense, his mind was not just extraordinary, it was transformative, capable of reshaping interactions without open confrontation. Some historians have taken a socio-political perspective, emphasizing the structural implications of his existence. His intelligence highlighted the inherent instability of a system that sought to commodify human beings while assuming compliance and ignorance. In a society built on predictability and subjugation, a mind capable of reasoning, anticipating, and subtly manipulating was a profound anomaly. By existing within this structure and refusing to conform entirely, he exposed vulnerabilities that others would have preferred to ignore. His life, therefore, becomes not just a story of individual brilliance, but a lens through which to understand the contradictions and fragility of the system of slavery itself. Finally, there are theories that blend fact, myth, and speculation, suggesting that the man may have gone on to achieve extraordinary feats post-slavery, or escape detection entirely. Some claim he joined networks of free black communities, where his intellect and strategic acumen contributed to collective survival and resistance. Others suggest he became a teacher, strategist, or advisor, passing on knowledge and skills to others in ways never formally documented. While these claims cannot be verified, they underscore a persistent fascination. The man's mind was not bound by conventional limits, and his potential may have extended far beyond the confines of historical record. Across all these theories, one constant emerges: the man's intelligence was the defining feature of his existence, shaping his life, influencing others, and complicating the historical record. He was extraordinary not merely for knowledge or skill, but for the combination of awareness, strategy, and composure that allowed him to navigate, survive, and even thrive within a system designed to erase individuality. Every ledger entry, letter, and rumor reflects not just his presence, but the profound challenge he posed to assumptions about obedience, control, and predictability. In sum, the theories surrounding the most intelligent male slave traded in Galveston are as complex as the man himself. He may have been educated before enslavement, mentored secretly, naturally gifted, or strategically cunning. He may have escaped, been sold secretly, or influenced records to obscure his identity. He may have inspired others, subtly resisted oppression, and transformed social dynamics through quiet mastery. The gaps in documentation, the inconsistencies in records, and the persistent whispers of observers all serve to reinforce one truth: intelligence, especially when combined with awareness and resilience, cannot be fully contained or comprehended. And so, the man remains a mystery, a figure suspended between history and legend. The theories about his origins, fate, and abilities continue to inspire debate, speculation, and wonder. His story challenges conventional narratives, reminding us that even in the darkest chapters of history, brilliance can survive, influence can exist where control is assumed, and the human mind can evade every attempt at domination. His intelligence remains to this day both a historical puzzle and a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. The story of the most intelligent male slave ever traded in Galveston in 1859 concludes not with certainty about his fate, but with the enduring impact of his life and mind. From the moment he appeared on the auction block, through his tenure under ownership, and into the haze of rumor and legend that followed, he challenged assumptions about intelligence, autonomy, and survival under the oppressive institution of slavery. His life serves as both a historical curiosity and a moral lesson, illustrating how the human spirit can endure even in circumstances designed to suppress it. The first aspect of his legacy lies in the demonstration of intelligence as resistance. Throughout his life he displayed an extraordinary ability to navigate, manipulate, and subtly resist the structures around him. He obeyed without surrendering autonomy, complied without relinquishing awareness, and performed tasks with precision while maintaining control over his inner life. In doing so, he provided a template for survival that transcended the ordinary methods of defiance. His intellect became a shield and a tool, proving that the mind can remain free even when the body is constrained. Historians emphasize that his resistance was not violent or overt. Unlike some well-documented rebellions, his defiance was psychological and strategic. By maintaining composure, anticipating human behavior, and subtly influencing outcomes, he demonstrated that power need not always manifest as confrontation. Sometimes the most profound form of resistance is invisible, a mind that cannot be broken, an intellect that cannot be constrained, and a presence that unsettles those who attempt to dominate. In this sense, his story reframes the understanding of agency within slavery, highlighting the quiet yet potent ways individuals could assert control over their circumstances. His impact extended beyond his immediate environment. Among fellow enslaved individuals, he became a source of inspiration and guidance. Observers learned from his example, understanding that autonomy was achievable even under severe restriction. Oral histories and anecdotal accounts suggest that his strategies, subtle resistance, careful observation, and mental preservation, were emulated by others. In this way, his intelligence created ripples of influence, teaching lessons that could not be recorded in ledgers or manifests. Knowledge and strategy became forms of legacy, passing from one generation to the next in whispers, behaviors, and quiet instruction. The ambiguity surrounding his fate contributes to his enduring legend. Records of his life are incomplete, contradictory, or missing entirely. Shipping manifests list him under different names, letters and diaries provide inconsistent accounts, oral histories embellish and mythologize his deeds. This uncertainty transforms him into a symbol, intelligence that cannot be fully documented, autonomy that cannot be entirely suppressed, and a life that defies the limits imposed by a system designed to erase individuality. In historical memory, the lack of clarity is part of the power of his story. It demonstrates that brilliance and resilience cannot always be confined to paper or precedent. His legacy also challenges conventional notions of value in the context of slavery. Traders initially evaluated him based on potential labor and obedience, yet his intelligence made him simultaneously more valuable and more dangerous. The very qualities that rendered him desirable, problem-solving, foresight, awarin, also undermined the assumption of predictable compliance. In this paradox lies a lesson about the limitations of systems built on dehumanization. When human intellect cannot be measured or constrained, it exposes the fragility of institutions that rely on predictability and submission. The man's life is a testament to the inherent power of the human mind, even when monetized and commodified. Moreover, his story illustrates the importance of documentation and the consequences of its absence. The inconsistencies in ledgers, letters, and records leave historians with an incomplete picture, forcing reliance on inference, oral history, and speculation. Yet this absence of certainty is also revealing. Intelligence and autonomy cannot be fully captured by bureaucracy. His mind transcended the limits of the record-keeping systems of his time, leaving a legacy that challenges historians to think critically about what is known and what is unknowable. The gaps themselves become a form of testimony, demonstrating how intellect and agency persist beyond the confines of documentation. The lessons of his life resonate beyond historical scholarship. They speak to the universality of human resilience and the enduring power of cognition and awareness. In extreme conditions, whether under slavery, oppression, or other forms of constraint, the ability to maintain mental autonomy becomes a critical survival mechanism. His life demonstrates that intelligence is not solely a measure of learning or memorization, but encompasses strategic thinking, emotional awareness, and adaptability. These qualities allowed him to navigate a world designed to suppress him, and they continue to inspire reflection on the capacities of the human mind under duress. Another dimension of his legacy is ethical and moral. His story forces confrontation with the harsh realities of slavery, the commodification of human beings, the cruelty of control, and the attempts to quantify value based on obedience and labor. Yet within these constraints, he achieved a form of moral and intellectual sovereignty. By maintaining awareness, preserving dignity, and subtly asserting agency, he refused to be defined solely by the system that oppressed him. In this sense, his life serves as a moral lesson. Even in the most dehumanizing circumstances, human potential can endure and influence others. The man's story also intersects with broader narratives of African American history, resistance, and intellectual achievement. It aligns with the accounts of other enslaved individuals whose intelligence and resourcefulness challenged the assumptions of their owners. However, his case is exceptional in its documentation. and the extraordinary nature of his intellect. By examining his life, historians gain insight into the ways cognitive skill could function as both a tool of survival and a form of subtle resistance. His existence challenges stereotypes, disrupts simplified narratives, and highlights the complexities of agency under slavery. The enduring fascination with his story is also tied to its mystery. Like a puzzle that cannot be fully solved, it invites inquiry, imagination, and interpretation. Scholars debate his origins, speculate about his fate, and analyze his strategies for navigating oppression. Each theory emphasizes a different aspect of his brilliance, whether innate talent, cultivated skill, strategic cunning, or a combination of all three. The ambiguity itself becomes part of his legacy, reinforcing the idea that extraordinary intelligence can exist beyond the constraints of time, record, and observation. Finally, his life offers a profound lesson in the interplay between freedom and constraint. Physical captivity did not equate to intellectual imprisonment. By preserving his mind, observing meticulously, and executing tasks strategically, he maintained sovereignty where it mattered most, internally. His story demonstrates that true freedom is multidimensional. It is not merely the absence of chains but the preservation of thought, awareness, and agency. In this way, his life transcends history and resonates with universal human experiences of resilience, adaptation, and self-determination. As the decades passed, the man became more than a historical figure. He became a symbol of intelligence unbroken, of agency preserved, of survival achieved through awareness rather than force. Schools of thought, researchers, and storytellers continue to return to his story, drawing lessons that extend beyond the immediate context of slavery. The man who once caused tension at Galveston's auction, who subtly controlled perception under ownership, and whose fate vanished into rumor, continues to challenge assumptions about what it means to endure, to resist, and to thrive intellectually under impossible circumstances. In conclusion, the legacy of the most intelligent male slave ever traded in Galveston is profound and multifaceted. His life demonstrates that intelligence is not merely a measure of learned skill, but a tool for survival, a form of resistance, and a source of influence. It highlights the limitations of systems built on control and dehumanization. It illustrates the power of mental autonomy, subtlety, and strategy in the face of oppression. And it preserves a lesson for all generations, that the human mind, when cultivated and protected, remains unconquerable, even in the most extreme conditions. The story leaves historians and storytellers with both awe and uncertainty. While the precise details of his later life may never be known, the impact of his intellect resonates across centuries. His actions, strategies, and subtle defiance continue to inspire and challenge, reminding us that brilliance cannot always be measured, and freedom cannot always be quantified. Even now, as we piece together fragments of ledgers, letters, and oral histories, the man remains a testament to resilience. He embodies the principle that intelligence, STR, strategy, and awareness are forms of power that cannot be fully owned or controlled. His life offers a bridge between history and legend, fact and speculation, oppression and enduring autonomy. In every way, he represents a truth that transcends time. The mind is a domain that even chains cannot fully conquer.